first part. And so these are the things that I study. I try to get back to the closest source material that I can find. And and I don't, because, you know, everything else that was written anyhow was nothing more than a copy. Just rearranged and reworded and so forth. If Allen Eckert hadn't had Simon Kenton, His Life and Times by Edna Kenton, and if he hadn't had Tecumseh and His Brother the Prophet by Benjamin Drake, and books of this type, he couldn't have written The Frontiersman.
But it's been proven by historians that he used primarily the Draper manuscripts.
Draper manuscripts.
But half of his notices, his numbers, people went back and looked in the Draper manuscripts and he made up the numbers.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
The guy didn't really use the Draper manuscripts.
I just.
But people live by that book. They think that that's the way it happened. Then you have another group of people, authors, that look at the Indians as the only Indian is a screaming savage, bloodthirsty savage.
Yeah, and they weren't.
People like Del Van Trees, who will write about Sinclair and the terrible yeah, they scalped. Mm-hmm. But hey, there was as many atrocities by the whites as there were by the Indians, scalping and everything. So.
You sound like you've been coming to my talks. Because that's exactly my words.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you deal with it, with these misguided views of white people are?
That is the reason these people come. They know they're misguided views, and they want to hear the facts. As history states it, and I try my best to find facts.
As much as you can.
As much as you can. And I'm up against the same thing that Eckert was up against. I'm up against fragmented information. Yeah. And you can, well, I think you people even put out a little history of George Rogers Clark here. And I have it in my library.
Well, it's not. It's the history of the battle.
It's a history of the battle that took place here. And now, there were interviews there, or there were depositions that they worked from several different people that were in the battle.
Yeah.
Hell, you would think they were in different battles. You see.
Well, there's a lot of. One thing is from their perspective. Where were they standing?
Where were they standing? What did they see?
The other thing is that the guys were 85 years old when they were writing them, so they were remembering what happened 30 or 40 years ago, and so things changed.
Well, you know, the battle out there wasn't fought where George Rogers Clark Park is.
No, it's
George Rogers Clark Park is just a memorial to it.
Yeah.
The real battle was fought down there where the Lower Valley Furniture Company was. Yeah. That was the center of the battlefield. And Dottie Law's farm, and she and her husband, I've been out to Dottie's, and we've gone over that country out there and trying to find a possible location of that old fort.
Good luck.
Well, they've built so many highways, and they've scooped out so much dirt that I don't think the site is even there anymore.
Well, I have a tendency to believe that the fort probably stood on a Novotny farm. Because they said that the accounts tend to say it was to the west of Piquetown, not the Kishpoko town, which was down underneath where the highway is. Mm-hmm. Okay, it was the Piquetown that was on right below the hills there, to the northern part of the valley.
Well, it was where New Boston was, essentially.
Yeah, but it's really difficult to ever pinpoint unless you do archaeology. And then the chances are, because the things have been changed so much.
They've been changed so much that I don't think there's any trace of anything there.
Yeah. Well, it'd be interesting to dig into the ground and find out.
It sure would. Yeah. It sure would. And I'd just love to be down there while it's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Maybe someday we'll be able to do that.
Yeah.
What do you think? You know, there's a great debate about Marmaduke Van Swearingen and Blue Jacket being one and the same person. What do you think about that?
Oh, I believe that.
You believe it.
Oh, yeah.
Because a lot of historians believe that this was basically kind of like the Betsy Ross myth that was
No.
perpetuated by the Van
No,
Swinnerton family.
no.
Because a lot of the original accounts talk of people who meet Blue Jacket, they call him an Indian. They don't call him a white man dressed as an Indian.
Well, I guess if you had been captured at his age and come into prominence at his age, which Blue Jacket was up into his 40s before he ever, and he'd lived an Indian life for so many years, and he was an Indian. He wasn't a white man, he was an Indian. But what really gets to me is, here's another thing about Eckert's books. He would lead you to believe that Blue Jacket ended up out in Oklahoma. No way. He never left Wapakoneta.
Right.
Tecumseh hung him. And they also killed his wife. Right there at Wapakoneta.
Right.
Oh yeah. Read John Johnson's book. Read other accounts of it. He didn't go out west. He was killed. He was murdered at about the same time as Leatherlips because Blue Jacket wouldn't side in with Tecumseh. Tecumseh killed off his opponents.
Oh, yeah. What do you think of captivity accounts? There's a heck of a lot, hundreds of them out right now.
Of what?
Captivity accounts like James Smith's narrative and Skuwa, the book that's been reprinted and everything.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good information in there.
Well, these, you're asking me if I'm reading some of these books that were printed within the last 10 years, okay? I don't read those books. They're not my kind of books.
Well,
I go back 150 years.
Well, all I was talking about is the actual accounts of somebody like James Smith, who was captured by the Indians, actually went right straight up through where the Piqua towns were, because he mentions he crosses a ford and he's up there in the ruins of an old Indian village, and then they take him north, and then finally he escapes up by the Great Lakes and everything.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I haven't read that particular book.
Usually they have some pretty good information, actually.
Yeah.
Because they give the reason why I read them is because they give a good description of what the Indians look like.
Yeah.
And that's important, I think.
Oh, I
understand.
when I give a talk on someone, I try to bring a picture of them.
Yeah.
Sometimes the picture shows them as an old man, like for instance Simon Kenton. There wasn't any pictures ever taken of Simon Kenton as a young man. He had to reach a certain age before people began to get interested enough in him to do a painting of him. Like Little Turtle. There was a painting of Little Turtle, but it was lost. The only painting that of Little Turtle hung in the White House.
I didn't know that.
And when the British burned the White House, they burned the picture. But somebody was smart enough to make a woodcut of that picture. And that's what we're looking at. That's the only thing we're looking at.
Yeah, they have, then there's some pictures done by Catlin a lot later of these guys when they were really old. You know,
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
That, you can kind of project their facial features back into what they might have looked like when they were young and everything.
Yeah.
But you're right. There's a series of Indian prints done by Henry Hamilton after he was, and those are really neat. There are
sure.
maybe a dozen of them.
There's a Frenchman that they had a program on him on public television, and he brought an earl or something over here, and he went up the Missouri River and he painted all of these Indian towns and so forth.
Oh, yeah. I don't know who it is, but I know another one named Victor Callot. Have you heard of him? And he did a map. He was here supposedly recording. He was nothing more than a spy. And he did a map, and it's in Paris somewhere. Somebody told me about it. And he, at the bottom, he has a painting, a little painting of a Shawnee Indian. And it's the only known 18th century painting of a Shawnee Indian. And it's really neat. I'll tell you what, if I can find the slide, I'll get it to you.
Oh, I'd
so
love
you
to
can use
have
it for your
it.
talk.
I'd love to have
This
it.
guy's sitting there.
You know, there's so much material out
yeah.
here that I just can't read it all.
Oh, I know.
I've been reading for 35 years and I still can't read it all.
Well, isn't that exciting?
Yeah.
To know that
Oh,
there's
sure.
still a lot more to go.
Sure. Yeah, that's right. It's just wonderful. It's like something came up last night. I was talking to a fellow about Filson, who was the great surveyor and historian in Kentucky. And of course, you have the Filson Club down at Louisville.
Yeah. Have you been there before? I've
Where?
never been to Pilsen Club.
Yeah, I've been there.
Is it what is it like?
Oh, I can't recall now.
Yeah.
It's in Louisville, and I think that since I was there, Lord, that's been years and years ago. And I didn't go in. It was closed. It was, I think it was on a Sunday when I saw it, and I just saw the outside of it. But when I was 25 years old, used to hunt until I got so soft-hearted I couldn't shoot anything anymore. That comes to you in later life, too. But anyway, I used to go out to Pennsylvania, to Lewistown. And the place where we hunted was up in the mountains, and we had a log cabin up there. And about a dozen of us would go out every year, and we'd hunt. This fellow's name was J. Filson.
Really? The family?
Back then, yeah. Back then, I was interested in history, and he knew it. He said, well, my great-grandfather laid out Cincinnati. I said, oh? He said, yeah. Now, at that time, I didn't know John Filson. He said, but they didn't call it Cincinnati, they called it Losantiville. Well, that's all he knew about the guy, apparently. Well, then I got to checking, and of course, when I really got involved in history, I found that this man had been commissioned by the Congress of the United States to make the first map of Kentucky. He was a beautiful writer, and he, in parentheses, wrote the history of the autobiography of Colonel Daniel Boone. This was way back in the 1780s. I think 1787, but don't quote me on that. And he wrote also the first history of Kentucky. Well, I wanted to get a copy of that book. I wanted a reprint of it. Well, that's impossible.
Yeah.
But a guy called me from the Cincinnati bookstore, and he said, Ray, he said, you've been looking for that book. He said, I got one here. I said, how much do you want for it? He said, $10,000. I said, what? He said, it's an original. There's only 12 of them. I understand that John Y. Brown, then governor of Kentucky, bought it. Well, I'm no competition to John Y. Brown, I'm not even in competition to the guy that washes his car, you know. So.
What book is this?
What's this?
What book is this?
It is Filson's History of Kentucky. I can't recall just the exact title of it, but it was the very first history ever written of Kentucky. And there's only 12 copies known to even exist. And reprints are so rare that you can't even get your hands on them. And I saw the book. I went down. I was interested enough. I said, I want to come down just to see it. Just a little book. It's only about that long and about, maybe that wide. And maybe that thick.
$10,000.
$10,000. He said, now, the centerfold map is gone, or I'd get $15,000 for it.
Heavens.
Some of these books that I have,
Probably worth that much.
no, I don't have any books in that category. But you know, I have books that I have paid $100, $200, $300 for, and sketches of Western adventure by McClung, Reverend McClung. Every time, Edna Kenton referred to that book, and Alan Eckert refers to that book. And anytime you read anything about Kenton, it refers to that book. That's the oldest known book and account on ever written of Simon Kenton. John McClung. I have that book. You know, anything that you can think of as rare, extremely rare, that's important, I probably have it.
Would it be legal for us to make a copy of it sometime? To put in our archive?
When they're that old, they're public domain.
Yeah.
We have a couple rare books, not necessarily on those subjects, but from that period. One is The Indian Doctor's Dispensatory, written by Peter Smith. It's the oldest medical book. We have that in our vault in the bank, and then we have John Cleese Sims' Compass, the one he surveyed all this area with. We call it the Ludlow Compass because he handed it over to Israel Ludlow to do the Ludlow line, and all their signatures are in the top plate.
You have that.
Yes,
Great.
it's in the bank.
Great. Well, it's just like down in Xenia. We had one of Simon Kenton's rifles,
Oh, I remember that.
and it was stolen.
Yeah, I remember that.
And
story.
you know, I'd have loved to have had that rifle when I gave the talk on Simon Kenton, just as an extra thing, you know.
Yeah.
Boy, they won't let that place, they won't let it out of that place, and it's locked in there, and even their
Well, it's just
members
like our
can't
compass.
even touch it. Now, when I was down there, and I gave my talks out there in the old cabin,
Log cabin.
That's a different story.
well, I'd have them. I had an experience down there one time. We had an open house for the whole week. Well, on this particular day, there were very few people went through the cabin, the Galloway cabin. And I had two things of importance. I had John Galloway's rocking chair that he took down the Ohio River on a flatboat. And it ended up over in the Ohio Historical Society, and after a bunch of fights and what have you, we finally got that back.
How'd you get it out of?
Oh, gee gods. That's a story in
They don't
itself.
want to give anything out.
That's a story in itself, but we got it.
Huh.
But it took an act of Congress almost to get it. Well, anyway, they gave that back, but they wouldn't give us back the pipe that he gave to Galloway. It was a peace pipe. They still have that. And we can't find out. They don't have it on display. We don't know what they did with it. Well, anyway.
That stuff is so rare right now.
That's right. And but we just I can't. I've lost my train of thought on what I was talking about there.
Your week you were down there.
Oh
with the
yeah.
open house.
Oh yeah. This man came to the cabin just about the time we were getting ready to close. And he had one of these aluminum walkers, and it was he and his wife. And so he came to the door, and the door was open of the cabin, and stuck his head in, and he said, is it still open? I said, it sure is. Come on in. I said, we're just getting ready to close. Well, he said, I'm such and such, and I have his name there in my office. I'd have to look it up. But he was from Springfield here. And he said, I'm a historian. And he said, I mapped the trails. Why? All the old Indian trails, all the old military trails. He said, I've spent years doing this. And as I understand it, I know one person who knows him. As I understand it, he's still alive. But he was up in years then. Well, anyway, he came in, and I helped him, and he sat down in a chair. He said, I've passed this old cabin so many times, and I wanted to stop. But he says, you see, it's a little bit difficult for me to get around. And he said, tell me the story about it. And I told him about the Galloways. And it was one of the very first cabins built in Greene County in 1798, and on, and who Rebecca Galloway was, and that Tecumseh had courted her in that cabin, and that this is where Simon Kenton was a good friend of Galloway's, and on and on and on, and all these people. And I said, in fact, there's a chair, that was the guest chair. I said, many, many famous people have sat in that chair. And I said, even Simon Kenton. And he said, is that true? I said, yeah, that has to be true. I said, we even have one of Simon Kenton's rifles. You have one of Simon Kenton's rifles? I said, yeah. He said, may I see it? And so I went over to the fireplace, and there was this old, nothing about it that would show it was what was called a trade item. Some trader came through the country, and he had this gun. And Kenton liked it, and he bought it. The lightest long rifle, oh, it was light as a feather compared to most of them. It was the rifle that he used every day. It's the one that he shot Indians with. You know, this is the one that he had to use. Because his other rifle, which is up in, that I know of, which is up in Urbana, that's a big, heavy thing. Decorated. Well, anyway, I gave this man the rifle. And he got up, and he got up like this, and he looked at that rifle, and his hands would tremble like this, you know. And he looked at it, he said, in my whole life, I never dreamed that I'd ever have an opportunity to hold that man's rifle.
Great.
He said, my friend, you've made my day.
Oh.
I said, and you've made mine.
Oh. Isn't that nice?
Yeah, it's some of the experiences I have. I was telling him about the Filson, that I used to go hunt. Well, Lord, he was a grandson, not more than a great-grandson. This man lived to be 100 years old almost. He just died about 3 years ago, and he was 98. This man was related. You see, I talk about all these people, and then I turn around and end up talking to their grandchildren.
Yeah. That's what's exciting about it.
That's what's so exciting about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too.
Do you have any other questions?
No, he covered pretty much what I was
Yeah, I think we
curious
got
about.
enough fuel there for the fire. We're going to write up our article.
Okay.
Well, I
And
think
it's
it's
for
great.
this
I think
paper
what you
here?
do is
Local
great.
historian.
I think you're happy.
And others.
Yeah. And so the local historian, which is, we'll have to show you a copy of it, a magazine put out to all the historical societies in the state, said, could you interview Ray Crain and put together an article so that they could put it in their magazine?
Oh, the Ohio Historical Society.
Yeah,
magazine.
because they
I
had
see.
been hearing so much, so many good things. See
Well,
what happens?
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, yeah. There's a what they look like. So I don't know. We want to take a little bit of your time and just kind of talk, and Kathy can ask you some questions, and I can ask you some questions, and we'll try to put something together. I guess the first thing is, and some of this will be in that newspaper article, I'm sure, that they did on you about a month ago. This is how you got started in this whole thing.
Well, really quite by accident.
Uh-huh.
I was a member of the Greene County Historical Society. I was on their board of directors. And one night we had a speaker that had to cancel out at the last minute. And someone, this has been about 10 years ago, asked me if, well, could you talk something about history? Knowing that I had a hobby of early Ohio history. And I said, my heavens, I'm not a speaker. I'm not prepared for any of this. And so anyway, I put on a program, and I've been talking ever since.
Oh, my.
That's been a long time ago.
Do you live down there then?
I lived in
Greene County?
Xenia at that time.
Oh.
I've lived in Springfield here about, it'll be 7 years this August.
Oh, why'd you move to Springfield from Xenia?
Well, my work mainly.
Oh, really?
I'm not retired. I work every day.
Uh-huh.
And I'm a chemical salesman.
Oh.
And I moved here because of the work. And I was just mainly interested in continuing on with this type of thing. And well, somehow, and I don't know exactly how it got started out here at C.J. Brown, but someone out there had found out that I had been giving these talks, and they asked if I'd give a talk
Uh-huh.
to a group on a Sunday afternoon, and I said, sure. Well, we had a pretty good crowd, like 25 people showed up. And they were used to 4 or 5 or 10 at the most. So they thought, boy, this is successful, you know. And so they asked if I would give a series of talks. And so that's how it started. And so now I've been giving talks to the public, putting on programs for them now for about 6 years. And except I did have some interruption last year with my illness. However, I have a rapport with these people, I guess, that well, it's hard to put it into words. They're almost like family anymore. You know, there's some people have been coming to my talk. They just don't miss a talk. They just don't miss a program. And so I, for instance, last night was a guest of the Sons of the American Revolution who had their meeting here at the Days Inn West. And I'm sitting with this fellow, and I thought he looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. You know, people, when they're all dressed up, look a little different than they do when they're out on a hike. And I said, I should know you from somewhere. And he said, yes. He said, I come to your talks out of C.J. Brown. And so he said, then I was on your tour down to Maysville, Kentucky. I said, no wonder I know you, you know, but it's just that kind of thing that everywhere I go, it seems like anymore, I run into people who have either been coming to our programs out there or have gone on our tours. And we put on these tours, and we're getting ready, as I brought one in a while ago, we're getting ready to take another tour into western and northwestern Ohio. And these tours are at cost. In fact, I have to watch very carefully that I don't have to subsidize them. And because you never know, you know, when you hire 2 big tour buses, I'm on the limb for something like $1,400, you know,
Sure.
that I have to write a check for. So, but anyway, they have worked out just fine, and I think we're going to have quite a time.
How many of these tours have you taken?
This will be the second one.
This is the second one. Your
This,
first one or
you
second
see,
one?
the tours, for instance, is another thing that I just quite by accident got into. Many people that had attended these talks for years said, well, Ray, why don't you take us on a tour of some of these sites? We don't know where they are. We don't know what we're seeing when we get there. And so I said, well, all right. That was a year ago last January. So lo and behold, the last week of March, I found that I had lung cancer. And the first day of April, I was operated on for it and was only given a 10% chance to live. Well, I beat the odds. And so, although I'm slowed down quite a bit from what I used to, the pace I used to keep, I at least am here to enjoy every day. And if you've ever been placed in that position where you really, you know, thought you weren't going to make it, every day becomes pretty precious, you know. And people like those that come to my programs out at C.J. Brown become pretty precious to you.
Sure.
And so I am trying to do what I can to comply with their wishes. And this tour is going to take us to the Johnson farm.
Okay.
And so we're going from there and then to Fort Recovery, and from there to the Fallen Timbers battlefield, and from there to Fort Meigs. And we're going to do this all in one day. We'll be leaving 8 o'clock in the morning, and we'll be returning about probably 9 o'clock that night. It'll be about a 13-hour trip. And I think the people will thoroughly enjoy it. And I get interest from all areas around here, and I spoke last Wednesday night, a week ago today, to the Champaign County Historical Society. And of course there were several up there that wanted to go on the trip. So I'm sure we're not going to have any problem filling the 92 seats.
Oh, I don't think so.
No. But that's just about all I can handle, you know. Just to get 92 people in and get them fed in an hour and get them back on a bus.
Sure.
Means you have to have things organized. And so one of your people here, Dave Wiles, is my right arm in these things. And Dave said, uh-oh, I see you have me hooked again. And so Dave and I are going to run the trip in a car and time it and so forth this coming Saturday, and also to make arrangements, a little better arrangements for meals. And of course we're going strictly to sites of the that are controlled by the Ohio Historical Society. All of those sites are under their supervision.
Yeah.
And so it's wonderful. And I had when that article came out in the paper, I had a young lady give me a call, and someone, I guess in the article it said something about that I was working on a book, a history of the area, which really was a compilation of various programs that I had put on, about 16 different programs. And I can't recall just what the article said, but anyway, this young lady called me and she said, Mr. Crain said, I would like, if I could, to assist you in writing this book. She said, I don't know anything about writing, but she said, I have a word processor, which is very helpful. And she said, I would be glad to work these things up and let you make changes and so forth then. And so we've been working on this.
What's her name? What's her name?
Anna, just a minute. I'll tell you. And I get into all kinds. Anna Houston.
Houston, the name sounds
She's
familiar.
from Springfield here. Her husband is does all of this work here for the Ohio Historical Society.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. And so he does this. He's the one that prints this up.
Uh-huh.
And he has been very helpful to me in getting some of these, getting all the information
Now, in
on
this
these various
book, what are
sites.
you doing? Just compiling information of things that you've told on each of your talks?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're actually putting together your...
Well, what I do, of course, I specialize in the pioneer period of Ohio and Kentucky. And I go back to the very beginning and I tell the people what was here in the way of forests and prairies and so forth. And then I tie that in. See, I try to time these things. It takes about 3 years to go through one program, full complete program. I tie this in with certain events then. Like, for instance, my last talk was on Little Turtle. The talk coming up on May 7th will be on John Johnson, Indian agent. Well, you can see on the tour, first thing we do is stop at John Johnson's home. And then we go into Little Turtle country, where he fought all of the major battles. And when I talk about the prairies and the woods and so forth, we tie that into a period along about July, where we can go out to the old Bigelow Cemetery, for instance, at Rosedale, Ohio, and have people go in there and look that over and see the old one little spot. This essentially 1/8 of an acre that's left of actual prairie grass and prairie flowers is all that's left of 385,000 acres that was there at one time. And the rest of it, it's almost extinct. That is natural prairie now. Well, of course, we're trying to get prairies started out here at C.J. Brown. And I gave a talk on the prairies when I first started in. That was the first talk I ever gave. Well, I got a call from C.J. Brown's manager, I can't recall who it was at that time, and they said, well, we just got a call from Lowell, from the gentleman down there, and wondered if you would call him. And of course, he was over the entire district. And so I gave him a call, and he said, Mr. Crain, I see you're an expert in the prairies. And I said, oh, no, I'm not an expert in prairies. I said, I talk about them, but I'm certainly not an expert in it. And, well, he said, in your position up there, he said, you might know of somebody that would be an expert. He said, we're trying to get a tall grass prairie started at C.J. Brown. Would you help us? And I said, sure, I'll be glad to try. So I brought in the finest prairie experts in Ohio. They're all associated either with the government or with the state. And we held a meeting there. And as a consequence, we have 2 fine prairie plots out there that's about 3 years old now, 4 years old. And so one of these days, maybe in the next 3 years, we should have a prairie out there that will give people some insight into what the old original prairies used to look like around here. I can see why Kenton came here. You see, when he was captured and taken to Old Chillicothe down here at Old Town, he ran the gauntlet, and then they started north with him towards Detroit. And the first stop they made was right out here on Route 68 North, where the Hunt Farm is. And there was this beautiful flowing spring. Well, of course, that river bottom down there is just as flat as a table. In those days, it didn't have one tree on it, probably. I wasn't there, so I can't verify it for sure. But it shouldn't have had one tree on it anywhere in the river bottom. That should have been all flat prairie. Now, your prairie grass was, at that time, 12, 14 feet high. I mean, it was taller, the old history said, taller than a horse and rider. And for a man in his position at that time as a captive, to look at this beautiful country around there and that beautiful spring, which they've never been able to stop, and they've done everything to try. And to lock that into his mind, and he was under an awful lot of stress, I'm sure, at that time, and say, if I can get through this, I'm going to come back here someday, and I'm going to build my home here. It must have been just beautiful, you know. In July, on through to fall, when the frost hits, those prairies that we had here were just a blaze of color. And you can go to the Bigelow Cemetery about the 1st to the middle of July, just about fair time here in Clark County. And you can look at this cemetery and just think of the millions of acres of this we had here in Ohio. It is just gorgeous.
Oh yeah, I can imagine so. Jack, you're back.
All right.
Just fine. He's one of our trustees.
Oh.
When you got started in this, where was your first stop in terms of research? And where have you been, basically, what do you hit in terms of research?
I have been...
Because I imagine it takes a lot of research time.
Yes, it does. That's, you know, some people golf and some people hunt and fish and so forth. With me, I study early Ohio history.
Uh-huh.
I have my own library of very rare books. I have approximately 100 volumes that I've gathered together. over the years, and I'm still gathering information. I have friends that are also historians, and we exchange books. If we can't find it, we still exchange books and continue our studies. And I try to get back to the basic source of information.
Come on in, Jack. That's all right. This is Ray Crain. Jack Earhart.
Hi, how are
Boy,
you
look
doing,
at that
Jack?
suntan. He's been in Florida for the last few months.
Yeah.
Look at that suntan.
Yeah. How you doing?
Just fine.
You want that?
Yes, you better believe it. Books, what are some of the titles? I want to get your opinion of some of the authors that are out now. There's a book out, certainly by a gentleman named James Alexander Thom, T-H-O-M. He wrote, his first book was Follow the River, and he's done some research on this period, the federal period, basically. Have you read
No,
his work?
I haven't.
How about Alan Eckert?
Oh, yes, yes. I think Alan Eckert has no doubt done more to get people interested in this period of history than any man I can think of. And now he started into this thing at least 25 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And I found his book to be very fascinating. There are certain things that he and I don't really agree on.
Right.
I don't think that anybody could write a book that two people would agree on necessarily.
Well, that's right.
But knowing how fragmented the information was, and knowing that he had to spend, as he says, 7 years researching for the book, I think he did an excellent job. And of course he is a writer. He's not a historian.
Oh, that's...
And of course things are more or less slanted towards things he wanted to do. The Frontiersman, of course, highlights Tecumseh and Simon Kenton. And many people come away after they read the book thinking that Tecumseh was a tremendous power, when he wasn't the power at all of the Indians. He was more or less a Johnny-come-lately, you know. And the real power were men like Cornstalk. I'm talking about the Shawnees in this area here. And of course the Shawnees took the blunt of practically all the major battles. But Cornstalk, Blackfish, Black Hoof,
Blackstone.
yeah, and all of these, Black Snake. These were Indians who were in the forefront of things so far as the Shawnees were concerned. The Miamis, Little Turtle. My heavens, I mean, you have to understand that Tecumseh, for instance, was an underling to William Wells, who was the chief of scouts and spies for the Little Turtle, and Wells was an underling to the Little Turtle. So he was his adopted son, really. And so you can see how far down the ladder Tecumseh was in the wars to control Ohio here.
Yeah. What do you think, if you were to make a choice between the importance of two frontier heroes, who would come out on top, Simon Kenton or George Rogers Clark?
Well, I'd have to hold them on an equal standing. Now, you know, when we're talking about Simon Kenton and George Rogers Clark, you're talking about two different situations. Simon Kenton was the man that helped the everyday settler get settled in Kentucky, and by the time Kenton got to Ohio here, he was starting to become involved in a lot of problems, financial problems, and so forth. But back then, in the 1780s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, while Kenton was still in Kentucky, he did more for the average settler than any man that I can think of. Now, having said, and then he was a scout for George Rogers Clark on practically every expedition. He was the chief of scouts. Now, Clark was more a federal man. He was in charge of the militias that went against the Indians. When you talk about George Rogers Clark, you're talking about a very important person at that time that helped in forming what we now have. They call him the father of the Northwest. He was indeed that. But when Franklin and his entourage got to Paris, for instance, to hammer out the Treaty of Paris, which ended the Revolutionary War, had it not been for George Rogers Clark moving all of the British forces out of Kaskaskia, Cahokia, and Vincennes and sending them back to Detroit, we wouldn't have had a foot to stand on, because he didn't have any help from the Congress of the United States. Those people over there were interested only in that land which lay east of the Appalachian Mountains. They were not interested in the land that went all the way to the Mississippi River, including our state. They weren't interested in it at all. But thanks to the bullheadedness of Franklin and others, they said, no, we won it. We pushed the British out of there, and this land is ours. And finally, with the help of the French, the British came along and signed a treaty to that effect. But you see, I look at, Simon Kenton is a local hero. You get into Pennsylvania, nobody's ever heard of him.
Oh, yeah.
Indiana.
Nobody's ever heard of him.
I've never heard of him before I came down.
Only here in Kentucky and Ohio have they heard of Simon Kenton to any degree, you know, unless you're a historian. George Rogers Clark is known all over the world. You know, he's a national man. So I have to put him. I have to put Kenton as being far more beneficial than Daniel Boone ever was. Boone was a loner. If it hadn't been for Kenton, there wouldn't have been a Boone. He saved Boone's life. But you can't put the two in the same category. They had different jobs, and they both excelled at what they did.
Let's see, do you have any questions?
Mm-hmm. I want to backtrack a little bit. You said at the very beginning that your, the Xenia, the Greene County Historical Society, knew that your hobby was Ohio history.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what do you mean your hobby was that? Does that mean you read a lot about it, or what were you doing?
Oh
as
yeah,
far
they
as
knew I
that?
studied it, and,
Okay, okay.
that my weekends and so forth many times were taken up with going to the various
just
sites
trips,
and so
okay.
forth.
That's what I
There's
was
still
wondering.
sites I haven't gotten to yet, but
Oh,
if I can live long enough, I'll get there someday. I want to go to the battlefield, Battle of the Thames, the battlefield there in Ontario, Canada. I've never been able to get there.
But in all
It's
this
very
time-
difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
When you go to Detroit to see the site of the old fort there, you're down in the middle of a bunch of skyscrapers, you know, and you've got a little plaque on the corner of a skyscraper that says, this is where the fort used to be.
Sure.
And so some of these places are hard to find today.
But you've never written anything down until now.
No,
You started
I haven't.
doing this.
I haven't even tried.
Yeah.
And the only reason that I have is because people want me to.
Yeah.
I don't know whether if I write it all down, if anybody want to ever print it or not. You know, it's just a.
It's just.
I've taken my talks, and I have rearranged it so that it fits a story, a history, if you will, of this area here and all the events leading up to it.
Yeah. You mentioned some of the subjects that you've talked about, like Tecumseh and Simon Kenton. Do you have a list of all the talks that you've given?
No, well, I guess I did give C.J. Brown a list out there.
Okay.
I'm sure they have it.
Well, maybe I could call Cheryl and get a
Yeah,
copy
well,
of
I start with the country and what it was like
that. Okay.
200 years ago. Then I have a talk about the very first people to see this country and how they described it.
Now,
And
these
how
are
the
all
very
separate
first
talks?
writers and historians described
Yeah,
it.
these are all separate talks?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They're all separate talks.
Okay.
I never give the same talk twice.
Okay.
I may use the same subject matter, but
Right.
there's so much material that my talks are never the same.
Yeah.
And I've been talking for 6 years. But you know, there's only so much subject matter.
That's right.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of material per subject.
Right. Right.
And even though I have to go over sometimes the same thing, I will throw in enough stuff, new stuff, that you won't know at the same time. And then, of course, I get all these requests for to give talks at various places. Good Lord, it ranges from. Well, first of all, let me give you some ideas on
Okay.
on the type of talks. I'm
Okay.
getting off that subject.
Yeah.
All right, we talk about the country. We talk about the very first people that saw it. Then we talk about the very first battles that occurred. That's the next group of people. That was the armies that came through here. I talk about the Battle of Point Pleasant. That was the very first battle in 1774. I talk about George Rogers Clark and his battles against the Illinois forts, and I bring him all the way through his life. And then I take the battle at Old Chillicothe in 1779. Now, of course, the Kaskaskia battles and the Illinois forts was in 1778. And the battles at Old Chillicothe. And I lay out the battle plans, work up a map of it so that people know who was where and what happened. And behind this log, we lost 9 men, you know. And why did we lose it? And Blackfish got shot in the battle, and he was shot in the knee, or in the leg, and died a few days later, probably of gangrene. We get into all this stuff. But what I try to do is I take each one of these frontier characters, and when I get through, I want you to know him personally.
That makes it much more interesting to people, I think. They
That's
can
why
relate to
they
it
get
better.
so interested in it, see? It's a personal thing. I mean, these people were flesh and blood, and they walked this land, and I want people to think of them as real human beings that had a job to do and did a fantastic job in general of getting it done. But I also want to see the other side. And so I talk about the Indians too. I want people to understand that they weren't represented. They had no written language. They had no history. And I've made it a point of getting acquainted with as many of the chiefs as I can that are here today.
Great.
Had a wonderful meeting up here about 2 years ago with the chief of the Wyandottes, Lee Ford Bearskin. He's out of Shawnee, Oklahoma. And wonderful man. And we, a group of us from up around West Liberty, well, I was called in to go up there and assist in it. You probably saw an article on the Smucker sisters. Well, these girls have been just
Neat people. Very
unique
nice.
people, and they are the ones that called me in to help with this. And just how this all got started up there, I don't know, but that's their problem. And I was called in, and I really couldn't lend much to what it was because they already had pretty much laid out the tour, but I was honored that they asked me to come. And just had a wonderful time with this chief of the Wyandottes. And at the same time, from Flint, Michigan, down came a fellow by the name of Zane. And he was the third great grandson of Isaac Zane.
Oh, neat.
And and of course Zane married Tarhee's daughter. And Tarhee was the principal chief of the Wyandottes at that time and lived for a while at Zanesfield. And so, you see, I get a little bit more into it than you might think. Not only do I try to make these chiefs come alive, now I'm out here meeting their grandchildren. and the descendants, don't you see? And so it just gets to be a wonderful experience to me.
Mm-hmm. Sounds wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And you were saying earlier too that you have a job, but you have two jobs, don't you? Besides doing all this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I represent two companies,
Two companies.
and I'm in sales. And my main job is chemicals.
And how old are you, if I may ask?
62.
62. Well, then you keep pretty busy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I stay busy.
Yeah.
I've been, for the last 2 weeks now, doing research for my talk coming up on the 7th on John Johnson. I've never given a program on John Johnson before. And, of course, John Johnson knew all of these people. He knew the Little Turtle. He knew Blue Jacket. He knew Tecumseh. He knew this prophet. He knew all these people personally. And to get his perspective of who these people were back then. Now, he thought of Tecumseh and his brother as nothing but a darn troublemaker. You know, history has written Tecumseh up as a man who was a great leader of his people. No, he wasn't. He was a leader of dissidents of all tribes. Anybody he could get to follow him. But his own people wouldn't follow him. They signed the Treaty of Greenville and they abided by it. Other than some, what we would call today, as then, just troublemakers. And but Blue Jacket adhered to the treaty, and so did all the other chiefs that signed it. That is, principal chiefs, including Tarhee the Crain. Yet, there were chiefs within his organization, like Roundhead, for instance, that was nothing but a henchman. He's the one that killed Leatherlips.
What do you think, being interested in this, do you think that there's a great difference between people's interests now and, let's say, people's interest in the 30s through 50s when the Anthony Wayne Parkway was getting started and the Ohio Revolutionary Trails and all those things were getting going, and places like Clark Park was formed as a state site, and now they don't even know if it's going to be open by the middle
Oh,
of the
let
year.
me talk about that just a minute. try to answer your other question. I want you to re-ask it. I gave a talk not too long ago at Oakwood Village, up here on Villa Road, to some retirees there. In fact, I had 2 talks that day. I had that one at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I had one at 7:30 to the Woodstock, Ohio Lions Club. Well, anyway, this gentleman that runs the place up there, they had just come out with a blurb in the paper that they might have to close George Rogers Clark's Park. Hey, you're getting close to my heart when you're doing that. See? He said, Ray, I would just love to put on a program here where we would charge $10 or $15 or $25, whatever, per plate. Would you come and speak to us on George Rogers Clark? I said, I'd just be happy to. He said, maybe if we can get 3 or 4 organizations in this town to come together, we can raise, he says, it takes about $12,000 to keep this thing going out there. He said, that's not an exorbitant amount of money for a city the size of Springfield. And I said, I'd just be more than happy to do that. So, I don't know. He's still working on it, I guess. And so...
Of course, even if it closed, it cannot be developed into anything else. It's stipulated in the
Oh,
will.
no.
It reverts back to the state if they try to put a baseball, not a baseball, but let's say a trailer court there or something. So at least it's protected that way. They have to leave it as a park, even if it's closed.
Well, that's true,
But what about all these other state sites? Eaton, the site of Fort St. Clair, which is in trouble right now.
I didn't realize.
Yeah. Then, at the same token, you have a lot of communities getting ready to do their bicentennials. Hamilton's gearing up for 91, Gallup Police for next year. Fort Recovery is all mixed up in their history. They're going to have their bicentennial, I think, in 91, when their Fort Recovery was never even formed until 1836. But they're trying to get the earliest date they possibly can, so they're going to go with the Sinclair's Defeat thing, which is ridiculous for a community that celebrates bicentennial when a community was not.
Was non-existent.
But you have all these places gearing up. Then you have a whole bunch of other communities looking towards their history to try to use it for promote the community. Okay, example, Steubenville is getting ready to, quote, reconstruct Fort Steuben. They have enough money to do one blockhouse, but they've never done archaeology there. They're going on 1 or 2 little accounts, and they're going to build it. They think it's going to revitalize the downtown. And you can go, in Pennsylvania it's even worse. They're building little forts all over the place down there, just with the idea we have to have our community fort. It used to be, let's have our community little village, because we have hundreds of little villages like Caesar's Creek and Governor Bebb's and everything.
Well, I see one good thing out of this. I see a lot of people maybe going at it wrong. But I see one good thing out of it. It's sure going to get a lot of people interested in this period in history.
Yeah.
And you and I are going to be very busy trying to help people to better understand what happened in this country here 200 years ago.
My next question is what do you think about the Hollywood or the nostalgic approach? See, we are inundated with nostalgia right now. And we, as historians, have to battle it every day of our lives. The concept that Hollywood has produced.
That's what's gotten everything screwed up.
Oh, but they have really gotten it bad.
I know.
Really bad. And to some degree, if you say one thing about history, this person says, well, I saw it on TV, or I saw it in the movies, or I saw it down at Joe Blow's log cabin, so it has to be right. It's
and
just like Alan Eckert, quite frankly.
It just makes me sick when I see people treat history so carelessly. We have generations of people that have grown up and died believing what they read in books and magazines and radio and television. I mean, Daniel Boone wasn't what was portrayed on television, and on and on. It's just a shame. And that's what I'm trying to offset. You know, I have a lot of faith in our young people. I have a lot of young people come to my talks. Not as many as I would like, but it seems that you have to get to be about 45 years old before you really appreciate history. I don't know why, but that seems to be the way it is. It wasn't that way with me. I started out appreciating history when I was probably about 6 years old. As I've told people before, I'm a product of the Depression. We didn't have television, and we didn't have radio, and we didn't have these things that we have today. And so my dad is the one that really got me interested in history. He loved history. And he loved this same period that I'm studying. And he would talk about the Zanes, and he would talk about Louis Wetzel, and on and on and on, about the old frontier figures. Well, I just enjoyed listening to that type of thing when I was a kid. Well, then, along about the time I got to be, 25 to 30, I started out really getting involved in history. Going to sales, finding rare books, going to Cincinnati to rare bookstores and other places, and trying to put together a library on this period. And I have books like Simon Kenton, His Life and Times by Edna Kenton.
You probably have Drake's book on Tecumseh.
I have Drake's book on Tecumseh. That's the kind of book